Okay, the time value mode. The time value mode is the opposite of the AV mode. You decide the time and the camera is going to decide the aperture. So what type of time do we have, of speed do we have in a camera? Well, roughly this is how it goes. This is the fastest speed that it has, 1/8,000 of a second. Imagine how fast that is. You need to have a lot of light to capture a photo at 1/8,000 of a second. Then it goes down to, to 1,4,000 of a second, 1,000 of a second, 1,500 of a second, 100 of a second, 1/40 of a second, 1/10 of a second, and then it goes to 0.3 of a second, 0.5 of a second, 1 second, 5, 10 second, and 30 second. That's usually the longest. So this is very slow shutter speed. Shutter speed is basically the time that the aperture is open where the light can come in. We call that the shutter speed. And this is very fast shutter speed. Now, you see here it says freehand shooting. Basically, if you're at 1/8,000 of a second down to 1/40 of a second, you can shoot using your hands. You don't need a tripod. You can just shoot during the day, and that's usually this is during the day conditions. You need a lot of light even to shoot at 1/40 of a second. So during the day, you don't need a tripod. You can take proper exposure photo, but when the shutter speed goes under 1/40 of a second, you need a tripod. Some very professional photographer can get down to 1/30 or 1/10 of a second without using a tripod, but it takes a bit of training to really hold still the camera. But take this as a stable data and you won't get blurry shots. If you go under 1/40 of a second, then you need to take a tripod. Otherwise, your photo is going to be blurry. Now, this is an example of a high-speed photo. This was during the day, and it was only possible to do this photo during the day where I had a jumper, jump like this in the air, and I took the photo. I wanted to freeze him in action, so I took the photo at 1/1000 of a second. And so he was sharp, and there was enough light. The aperture was probably around like 4 or something, and it worked. And that's how I used the TV mode, because I really wanted to make sure that I could freeze the action. This is another example of completely the opposite. The speed here was 30 seconds, which is the longest you can do in most of the camera. And 30 seconds, look what happened to the clouds. The clouds got all fuzzy, stretched out. The water is silky looking. I love this type of photography. We call this long exposure photos. And I forced in 30 seconds to get that result. Next, we have another example of long exposure photo. I was at 8.8 and the speed was 4 seconds. I liked 4 seconds because clouds, became stretchy a little bit. The water started to be silky looking, and I like that in landscape. So that was one of the time I used this time value. Now, what happens if you take a photo and let's say you're at 8.7 because you're taking a landscape, and the computer says, okay, now I need 1/30 of a second or 1/20 of a second. You just press the button on your camera, you have set the f-stop, and the computer tells you, well, now the speed is at f30. You know that at f30 your photo is not going to be sharp. And that, believe me, will happen most of the time. So how to get around that? Well, we get around that using what we call the ISO, which we'll see in the next video.